There's a deep paradox, almost to the point of sort of a funny irony in spirituality, that spirituality in its true sense is that which helps us to awaken from this false sense of self, this false idea of self, this false image of self. And yet, the very thing that's supposedly trying to wake us up from this false image of self encourages us to focus our attention almost entirely on self. You ever noticed? When you look within, most people, when they look within, what they find is themselves. And if you've never looked within before, the self that you sometimes find when you start to look within can be shockingly chaotic. You know, those of you who can remember when you, if you have, but first started to meditate, and you see this self and all of its rampant thoughts just kind of going in circles. Almost seem, a lot of times when people first see it, they get afraid of them. They get afraid of it because they realize, my God, what's going on inside myself is so chaotic and so unpredictable and makes so little sense that it's very shocking to see it when you first see it. Unfortunately, our response to that is usually to try. Our response to all this is actually something that comes from self, which is we try to get rid of it. Or that's a more concrete way of saying purify it. Purify is a spiritual way of saying get rid of something. Do you know? I mean, that's not its original idea of what to purify is, but I think that's how most people actually approach it, to get rid of. So this deep paradox is that most human beings are self-centered. And again, I'm saying that in just a factual way, not a moralistic way. If spirituality is meaningful, it's that which helps us to wake up from that self-centeredness. One of the great Zen masters in the past, a guy named Dogen, which Zen teachers love to quote Dogen, but one of his most famous sayings that he ever wrote was, to know yourself is to forget yourself. And to forget yourself is to be enlightened by the 10,000 things. The 10,000 things, when it's spoken about in Buddhism, 10,000 things means everything. But the first part of it is really very key. To know yourself. It's very paradoxical, isn't it? To know yourself is to forget yourself. It's one of those things that seems like a strange thing to say because it seems so contradictory, so paradoxical. To know yourself is to forget yourself. Of course, even as soon as you hear it, it sets you up in a way. Because you may then start to try to forget yourself, which is a great way to always remember yourself. You ever know? If you're, whatever in your life that you're trying to forget is the very thing that you actually remember all the time, right? So, you know, the deeper we go into the heart of things, the more paradoxical they become. But they're only paradoxical because our mind is very linear, right? And it's very hard for the mind to really include things that seem opposites, but actually aren't. Like heads and tails of a coin, they seem to be opposites, but they're actually not because they're all of the same coin, you see. So lots of things in life, the deeper experiences of life and existence have this quality of being very paradoxical. So this was Dogen's way of saying to not be self-centered, to lose your self-centeredness. He called to forget yourself, which is kind of a quaint way of saying it, you know. To know yourself is to forget yourself. Generally, when we have our first real deep spiritual shift, our first realization of our true nature, what we realize in some way, very fundamentally, is the self, the sense of self, the idea of self, the image of self, our whole notion of ourselves, that's actually what consciousness wakes up from. That there's the realization that all of that doesn't define you. So there may be a sense of self, there may be an idea of self, there may be images and history and memory, and it goes on the ways that we consciously and probably more importantly unconsciously define ourselves. But to really have that first glimpse of the truth of you is to wake up from that self.